You are waiting to have more before offering what you have. More time, more money, more preparation, more stability, more clarity about the result. And while you wait for this more, what you have now remains stagnant, carefully stored, preserved for a moment that always seems a bit further ahead than the moment you are currently in. You look at what you have and make the same calculation any reasonable person would make. This is not enough. It is not enough for the scale of the problem. It is not enough to produce the result the situation demands. It is not enough for anyone to notice, for anything to change, or for it to be worth the risk of offering and being ignored. This calculation seems prudent. It seems responsible. It even seems spiritual. You are being honest about your limitations instead of acting on impulse. But there is a possibility that this calculation systematically ignores, and it is upon this possibility that this entire video will be built. What if the economy within which you are calculating is not the economy within which God operates? Because if Scripture has a pattern that repeats with disturbing consistency from Genesis to Revelation, it is this. What human calculation discards as insufficient is frequently the exact material that the divine economy elects to move what human sufficiency could not move. Not despite the insufficiency, through it. As a condition of operation, not as an obstacle to be overcome before beginning. In the next few minutes, I will show you why science confirms that you systematically underestimate the impact of what you do, why Scripture has a specific and consistent logic regarding the small that most readings pass over too quickly to see, and what the concrete question is that you need to ask about what is in your hands right now, which you continue to postpone because it does not seem large enough to matter. Stay with me. There is a line of research in social psychology that has produced one of the most consistently surprising results of the last decade.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you, who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
And it has direct implications for what we are discussing. Researchers from the University of Chicago who study the perception of social impact conducted a series of experiments where they asked people to practice small acts of kindness, writing a note of encouragement to someone, offering a coffee, giving a genuine compliment, and then estimate how much that action had meant to the recipient. In all experiments, the estimate of the person who performed the act was significantly lower than the actual impact reported by the person who received it. The pattern was so consistent that the researchers named the phenomenon undervaluation of prosocial acts, the systematic underestimation of the impact of one's own actions on other people. What the researchers found was not excessive modesty or cultural humility. It was a real cognitive distortion, operating automatically and unconsciously. The person who acts focuses on what they consider objective limitations of their offering. The note is poorly written, the coffee is simple, the compliment is small, while the person who receives focuses on the experience of having been seen, considered, remembered. The two are measuring different things, and the underestimation of the one who acts is structural. It does not go away with more information about the situation. The study was published in the journal Nature Human Behavior and replicated by researchers at Cornell University in different cultural contexts with equivalent results. The underestimation of one's own impact is not a personality trait. It is a universal tendency of human cognition, which means that you are systematically reaching wrong conclusions about the weight of what you do. What you call too small to matter The person on the other side may be calling exactly what I needed. What you call insufficient to produce a result may be moving something that you do not have the instruments to measure, because the effects are on a register that your calculation cannot reach. This alone would justify a revision of your calculation of sufficiency. But Scripture goes much further, and in a way that changes not only the estimate of impact, but the entire logic of the economy within which the impact is produced. If you are arriving at this channel for the first time, subscribe now. What we build here every week is exactly this: the intersection between the depth of Scripture, what science confirms, and what you are living in your real life. Click the red button and activate the bell so you don't miss what is to come. And stay with me, because what I am going to show you now about the logic of the small in the Bible will reorganize how you see what you have in your hands. In the Gospel of Mark chapter 12, Jesus is sitting in front of the temple treasury observing. The text records this with a specificity that seems deliberate. He was looking, not passing by, not arriving to teach. He was stationary, observing who deposited what. And what he describes afterward is a contrast that has the structure of a complete economic argument. Many rich people deposited much, and then a poor widow arrived. 2 mites, the smallest monetary unit in circulation, less than anything anyone else around had deposited. And Jesus calls the disciples and says, "Truly I say to you that this poor widow has given more than all the others." And the argument he uses to sustain this statement is of an economic precision that most spiritual readings of this text erase. All the others gave from their perisseuo, from their surplus, from what was left over after needs were covered. The widow gave from her heusterema. Heusterema is the Greek word for lack, deficiency, that which falls short of enough. It is the word that describes the state of one who does not have enough and yet acts. The widow did not give from the surplus. She gave from the deficit. She gave what she did not have to give, measured by the standards of human sufficiency calculation. And Jesus declares that this is more. Not more in a sentimental or abstract spiritual sense, more in the only sense an economic argument can have: greater value produced in relation to the available resource. The widow's rate of return is infinite because she operated with heusterema and produced what the rich with perisseuo could not produce. The attention of Jesus himself stopped before the treasury, calling the disciples specifically so they could see what she had done. The widow did not know Jesus was looking. She did not calculate the impact. She did not wait to have more. She simply went with what she had, which was less than any reasonable standard of sufficiency, and deposited it. Go to the comments now and write dynamis. Just that word, dynamis. Because that is the Greek word for the power that does not depend on the size of what you have to manifest itself, and I will explain in depth what it means in this video. But when you write dynamis now, you are declaring, I recognize that the economy within which I have been calculating what is sufficient is not the only economy that exists. Write dynamis now. Before reaching the word dynamis, I need to show you a pattern in Scripture that goes beyond the story of the widow, because it appears with such consistency that it cannot be treated as a narrative coincidence. It is a specific, recurring, and structural logic about how divine action relates to the small and the insufficient. In the book of Judges, chapter 6, Gideon receives the call to liberate Israel from the Midianites, and the first thing he does with the summons is what any person with reasonable self-awareness would do. He argues with insufficiency. My family is the poorest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. This is not false modesty. It is an objectively correct assessment. Gideon is not overestimating the difficulties. He is describing reality with precision. And the call does not revoke the assessment. It does not say, actually, you are underestimating your potential. It does not offer an alternative view of the available resources. The call simply moves forward. I will be with you. But the story of Gideon has a detail that goes beyond the call to the least, and it is where the logic of the small in the divine economy becomes clearer and more disturbing. Gideon gathers an army, 32,000 men, and God says, there are too many, and a process of deliberate reduction begins that seems completely irrational by the standard of conventional military calculation. 22,000 leave, 10,000 remain. There are still too many. A new selection process, 300 remain. 300 against a Midianite army that the text describes as numerous as locusts, countless as the sand on the seashore. And God explains the criterion for the reduction with an honesty that rarely appears so explicitly in Scripture. Lest Israel boast against me, saying, "My own hand has saved me." The reduction was not to make the task possible with fewer resources. It was to make the origin of the victory unequivocal. 300 men against a countless army does not produce victory through superior military strategy. It produces a victory that has only one explanation, and that explanation is exactly what the entire story needed to record clearly. The logic of reduction in Gideon completely inverts the calculation of sufficiency. What was too small to produce a result by conventional standards was exactly the right size, so that the result produced would be attributed to the right source. This has a practical implication for how you interpret your own limitations. When you look at what you have and calculate, "This is too small," your calculation may be correct within one economy, and it may be systematically wrong within another. Researchers from IPEA, Institute for Applied Economic Research, who study the impact of small-scale community initiatives on the Brazilian social fabric, documented a phenomenon that researchers call the decentralized multiplier effect. Small community interventions carried out by people without significant institutional resources frequently produce measurable well-being impacts that exceed the size of the invested resource several times over, especially when the intervention occurs in contexts of high vulnerability, where the presence of any care agent is scarce. In other terms, the impact is not proportional to the size of the resource. It is proportional to the absence of equivalent resources in the environment where the action occurs. Gideon with 300 men in a field of 200,000 Midianites, the widow with 2 mites in a treasury, where the rich had deposited amounts that made her mites invisible. The context defines the weight of what is small, and the context where you are placed may be exactly what transforms what you consider insufficient into the most significant resource available. But there is a story in the Gospel of John chapter 6 that connects everything we are discussing with a scene that anyone who knows it has probably read dozens of times without noticing the detail that changes everything. Jesus is in a field with 5,000 men, not counting women and children, at the end of a long day, and he asks Philip a question that John records as a test. "Where shall we buy bread for these to eat?" Philip makes the immediate calculation. 200 denarii of bread would not be enough for each to receive a little. The size of the problem exceeds any accessible resource. And then Andrew appears with information that he himself discards before he even finishes delivering it. There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But, and here is the detail, what are they among so many? Andrew's phrase is perfect as a diagnosis of the human sufficiency calculation. He has complete and correct information about what is available, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and simultaneously and automatically discards it with the but. The resource exists, the description is precise, and the calculation already concludes with irrelevance before even presenting the data to the one who has the authority to make a different assessment. How many times have you been Andrew to yourself? You have the resource, the time, the skill, the connection, the idea, the available step, and before presenting it to any other context of evaluation, you have already discarded it with your own but. But it is not enough. But it won't be enough for everyone. But it won't solve the problem on the scale it needs to be solved. But I would need much more than this for it to be worth it. Jesus instructs the people to sit down. He receives the bread and the fish. He gives thanks. He distributes. And John's text uses a specific word to describe what was left over. 12 baskets of fragments, more than there was before the distribution began. The Greek word that John uses to describe the production capacity of the bread and fish before the multiplication, what they had in themselves to offer, is dynamis. And dynamis does not mean power in the sense of brute force or quantity. Dynamis means intrinsic potential, installed capacity that does not depend on size to be real. It is the word from which we derive dynamic, dynamo, dynamite, the energy that is compressed in a form that does not externally reveal what it contains. The dynamis of the 5 loaves and 2 fish was not in the quantity. It was in the quality of the delivery. in what was placed in the hands of the one who had the authority to operate with an economy different from the one Andrew was calculating. If this content is reaching something real, if you are recognizing your own calculation of insufficiency within these stories, click the like button now. Because when you like, you help this video reach the people around you who are also holding on to what they have, waiting to have more, and who need to hear this with the same urgency that you needed. Click the like button now. There is a Hebrew term that appears in the prophetic writings of Isaiah, Micah, and Zephaniah, and which accurately captures what the theology of the small in Scripture is consistently describing. The word is shear, shah, frequently translated as remnant, the rest what is left over. But the theological weight of shear is much greater than the translation suggests. The shear is not what was left over by accident after everything of value was taken away. It is what remained through faithfulness when mass abandonment occurred. It is the small group that did not leave when the majority did. The residue that maintained coherence when collapse dispersed the whole. And in the prophetic writings, the shear is not a tragedy. It is a point of divine action. It is exactly the material with which God rebuilds what the collapse destroyed. You have probably felt like shear at some point, like the rest that was left over from something larger that did not sustain itself, like what remained after a version of yourself, a relationship, a project, or a phase of life collapsed. And the temptation is to read this state as permanent insufficiency, as proof that what is left is not enough to build something new. But the prophetic logic of the shear is the opposite. It is exactly because it remained when the rest left that the remnant carries something the original whole did not have, the integrity forged by permanence. And it is this specific quality, not the size, that makes it the building point. Researchers from PUCPR, who study post-trauma resilience in Brazilian adults, identified what they call the undervalued survivor syndrome, the tendency of people who have gone through severe crises to underestimate the value of what remained intact in them after the crisis, compared to what they lost. The focus on what left produces an assessment of what stayed that is systematically more negative than the external assessment made by people observing what the person still has and still is. In other terms, you are performing an analysis of the shear you have become using evaluation criteria that measure what was missing, not what remained. And this analysis leads you to underestimate exactly what is most relevant. Activate the notification bell now, because in the next video, I will finally deliver the episode that was promised throughout this entire series. What happens in your relationships when you start to move with what you have, when you stop waiting for enough and start acting within the hysteresis? Why certain people move away, why this distancing is not what it seems, and the biblical and psychological distinction between isolation and separation that will completely change how you interpret what is happening around you in this season. Activate the bell now. Now I want to ask you the question that this entire video was building toward, and I want you to hear it with total honesty, without the automatic reflex of defending the calculation you have already made. What do you have in your hands right now that you are holding on to, waiting to have more? Not in an abstract way, concretely. Is there a conversation you are waiting for the right moment to have, but what you are waiting for is to feel that you have enough words, enough clarity, enough confidence? Is there a skill you have that you are holding back because it is not developed enough yet to be relevant? Is there an idea that appears repeatedly and that you discard with the same "but" as Andrew? But I don't have the resources, but it's not the time. But who will want this? But it's not enough to solve the problem in the size it exists. The widow did not wait to have 2 more mites. The boy did not wait to have enough bread for everyone before delivering what he had. Gideon did not wait until he had an army the size of the Midianite army. None of them operated with sufficiency before acting, because the economy within which the result was produced did not demand sufficiency as a precondition. It demanded the delivery of what was there. Now I'm going to give you 3 concrete practices to begin operating within this economy, not as an abstract spiritual exercise, as a specific behavioral change that will alter what you do with what you have starting this week. The first practice is what I call the hysteresis inventory. During the next 3 days, write down what you have that you have been discarding due to insufficiency, not what you would need to have to act, what you already have and are holding on to. A skill you consider not developed enough. A connection you consider not established enough to activate. A financial resource you consider too small to start. A step you consider too irrelevant for the size of what you want to achieve. Write it down without filtering, without already evaluating if it is truly insufficient. The goal is to make visible what you are holding, because you cannot deliver what you do not recognize you have. The second practice is the offering without waiting for the result. Choose one item from the inventory, one, not all, and act with it before being sure of the result. The instruction here is not irresponsibility. It is not making financial decisions without planning or acting without discernment. It is identifying specifically where discernment has already happened, where you already know what to do, and where the only thing missing is the delivery without a guarantee of sufficiency. The boy delivered the loaves before knowing they would be enough. He did not calculate the ratio between 5 loaves and 5,000 people, and then decide the numbers made sense. He delivered, and the sense appeared afterward. Researchers from the University of Chicago, who continued the study of the undervaluation of prosocial acts, identified that the only intervention that consistently reduces the underestimation of one's own impact is direct exposure to feedback from the one who receives the action, not the instruction that the impact is greater. Real contact with the recipient's experience. In other terms, you will not recalibrate the value of what you have simply by being convinced it is greater. You will recalibrate when you offer and observe what happens. The offering without waiting for the result is the recalibration mechanism. The third practice is retroactive recognition. Every week, a simple question: where in the last 7 days did something I considered too small produce an effect I had not calculated? Not to confirm a theology of automatic miracles, but to train the perception that the cycle of systematic underestimation dulls. Because the tendency to undervalue one's own impact is not only prospective, it is also retrospective. You do something, it produces a result, and yet you minimize the connection between the two. Deliberate retroactive recognition builds over time a base of personal evidence that interrupts the automatic cycle of discarding, in the same way that Habakkuk in the previous episode anchored future faith in the memory of past provision. Is there someone in your life who you know is holding on to what they have, waiting to have more? Who is postponing the step, the conversation, the offering, the delivery, because the calculation of sufficiency keeps reaching the same conclusion? Send this video to that person now, because sometimes the permission to act with what one has, grounded in scripture and confirmed by science, is what unlocked what months of waiting for enough could not. Share this video. Before closing, I need to say what this content is not, because the nearest distortion has real potential for harm. The theology of the small is not an instruction to act without planning, without discernment, and without responsibility for what you have. Gideon consulted, confirmed, and organized the 300 before acting. The boy delivered what he had to Jesus. He did not go out distributing randomly on his own. The widow made a deliberate and conscious decision, not an emotional impulse of the moment. What the theology of the small rejects is the logic that says, I will only act when I have enough by the standards of conventional sufficiency calculation. This logic is not prudence. It is the voice of Andrew's but, operating as the final criterion, and it discards what Jesus would have received from the boy's hands before he even reached Jesus. Delivery does not replace responsibility. It is the act of responsibility that you can already practice within what you have, within the situation that exists, within the moment that is available now, without waiting for the enough that always seems to be a bit further ahead. Dynamis is not quantity. It is the potency installed in what you have that only reveals itself when you deliver, instead of holding on. You have reached the end, and before you go, I want you to keep a concrete image. The widow deposited the 2 mites and left. She did not stay waiting to see what happened. She did not monitor the treasury to observe if anything changed. She did not check if Jesus had noticed. She deposited and went, and Jesus was looking, stopped deliberately, calling the disciples so they could see. She did not know she was being observed. She did not act to produce that effect. She acted with what she had because it was what there was to act with. What you are holding on to will not reveal its dynamis while it is in your hands. It only reveals itself in the delivery. And there is the real possibility, documented by science and recorded in each of the stories we discussed today, that the impact of what you deliver is completely different from what your calculation of sufficiency allows you to imagine before delivering. The economy you are calculating is not the only one that exists, and what you consider too small may be exactly the right size for the economy that operates where your calculation does not reach. In the next video, finally, after being promised in each of the previous episodes, I will deliver the content about relationships in a season of change. What happens to the people around you when you start acting with what you have, when the shear that you are begins to move? Why some people move away? Why this distancing hurts in a specific way, and why it is not what it seems? And the biblical and psychological distinction between isolation and separation that will reorganize the way you read your relational environment throughout this entire season. Until then.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you, who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.